Hello and welcome to Faultlines. I'm your host SHAHZAD RAZA. The government has decided to give maximum relief to the salaried class person in tax revenue, especially in the months to come. And this was stated by Finance Minister Mohammad Aurangzeb while he's saying that all the conditions set by the IMF would be fulfilled, but the government understands that the salaried class people, they are under a lot of burden, and the government is going to ease that burden, and how it's going to do it, it's yet to be seen. However, the finance minister was very confident not only the government would fulfill all the conditionalities of the International Monetary Fund, but it will also give the maximum relief to the people, especially the salaried class person in Pakistan. Over the last 2 years, the salaried class persons, they have emerged as the third largest segment which is contributing to the tax revenue in Pakistan, followed by the large-scale manufacturers and the industrial sector. The revenue target set by the government and to be collected by the Federal Bureau of Revenue is the 13,500 billion rupees. I mean, it's a huge and the first time in the history of Pakistan such a big target. And how we are going to achieve it? There are two options. Number one, that you burden the already the burden segments which are already contributing to the I'm sorry, tax revenue, or you bring in to the net the sectors which are really not paying the taxes which are due against them, in which this is the real estate sector, there is the agriculture sector, and the government has putting a lot of emphasis to the convince people, especially leading those sectors, that they should fulfill their national obligation and pay the taxes which are due. I mean, this is the key question, and the focus of our discussion is going to be the tax collection, what reforms needed, and how can we really convince people to fulfill this important national obligation. It is not possible that the government would always take the punitive measures to convince people that they should pay their due taxes, but it is the duty of the people, if they are earning money and if they are getting revenue for themselves or their companies inside Pakistan, and it is their duty to pay the due taxes. In the studio, we are being joined by Ammara Mujahid. She is an economic expert. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Ammara. Dr. Khaqan Hassan Najeeb is joining us on the video link. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for joining us. First of all, Dr. Saab, I'll come to you. Whenever we say and whenever you set ambitious target for the revenue collection, and now that I mentioned that 13,500 billion rupees, it's not a small target, and lot of efforts are needed which are being put in place, and secondly, lot of convincing is needed to the people, because not always that you take the harsh measures to convince people. I mean, this is not the way, this is not the solution. So the people should realize, the people who are representing those sectors which are really not contributing their tax net. So how can you convince them? One thing, that you can take the strict action against them, or secondly, that you convince them that if they will pay the tax, the country would grow and ultimately their sector would grow. Dr. Saab.
So, Shahzad, tax collection in Pakistan has been a matter of concern for a very long time. Pakistan's tax to GDP ratio across the country is hovering around 10% of GDP, whereas our expenditures are far greater, and that's why the need to have a higher tax to GDP in the country. I think a discussion that doesn't happen much is that there are some taxes that are in the provincial domain, and then the major taxes are in the federal domain. So if we start with the federal domain, I think the first principle that was applied by IMF is more of an accounting exercise. And the accounting exercise was the following: that Pakistan collected 9,400 billion rupees last year, and they said 40% growth to improve the tax to GDP by 1.8% just in 1 year. I think that was a ambitious target, and a 40% growth itself was an ambitious target, given that our growth rate of the economy and inflation put together are not more than 10-11%. So to get to 40%, we put in a number of new taxation measures. Especially, I think those were hurtful for the country: manufacturing super tax, the salaried class 38.5% taken to the higher bracket, and the non-salaried as well. And then we promised that we will do agriculture income tax, retail and wholesale, and transactional taxes on the real estate. So if you see this whole mix, I think things didn't pan out as they should have been. We should have started with a smaller target. Increasing 40% itself is now turning out. In the first 6 months, there's a 386 billion rupee gap, and I think another month put together till January end, there is about 470 billion rupee gap in this collection that we are trying to do. If I was to extrapolate it, this would probably mean a gap of nearly 800 to 1,000 billion when we get to end of June. But despite this fact, revenues
But you
have
never
grown
know.
by
What if our
26%.
we improve our performance, and I mean, as we noticed that during the in the last months of the financial year, there's always an excitement and in the increase and upward trend of revenue collection. We have always seen this in the past.
Right. So even in the first 7 months, it's not that we haven't done well. I think we've done well. We have increased our tax collection by 26% over last year, which itself, given a slow economy, given that inflation has dropped tremendously in the country, is a good performance by the authorities. So let's believe in that. I think as we move forward, we need to discuss with the IMF the target, and there is space on the expenditure side. As our inflation comes down, it helps the policy rate, which has dropped by 10% to 20, from 20 to 12. So it gives government the space. The money that it had to spend on the markup has come down. So think about that. On a longer term basis, of course, there are tax gaps, as you have mentioned. The authorities have calculated a tax gap in the sales tax of about 3,400 billion rupees. Agriculture income tax, we have just moved. This is again in the provincial domain. So I keep saying that there are some things that the provinces had to do. So four of the provinces have now legislated to move on agriculture income tax, albeit this should have been done earlier, but they have moved
As
on
I
this.
mentioned in the beginning, Dr. Saab, that finance minister promised that there is going to be a relief for the salaried class person, and the salaried class people, they are paying more than 25%, almost 25% more taxes than they used to pay a couple of years ago. So the thing is that how they are going to offer that relief or concession to the salaried class people. What is the gap or the financial cushion available for the government?
So as we move into, so I think this will likely come in the next budget. As we move into the next budget, hopefully there will be expenditure growth which will be lower than Pakistan has done in the past. So there will be space that we don't have to spend as much higher as we've been doing over the years. So there will be some room there. Secondly, hopefully some monies will start coming through agriculture income tax. We promised the IMF that we will collect nearly 50 billion rupees from the Tajir Dost scheme. So hopefully through registration of the top tier people and the tier one retailers having POS machines, our sales tax as well as our taxation on the retail and wholesale would improve. So monies would start pouring in from there. And hope.
And another factor is how another factor is going to contribute in the overall revenue collection target is the lowering of your interest rate. Whenever you reduce the interest rates, the business activities they start generating, and the business start flourishing. So is it going to be a key factor in helping the government to collect or reach the target what they have set in the last budget?
So no doubt, when economic activity picks up in a country, and instead of a sale of 100, you're selling 150, automatically income tax, sales tax, all kinds of taxation improve. And let's hope that with the lowering of the markup rate, with some energy sector lowering of the prices that we are going to see, there is some more business activity in the country. In the world also, inflation has gone down, and so their interest rates have also come down. So hopefully economies will tend to do all right in the coming year, and there'll be a better demand for Pakistan. So if you put all these things together, we may have more room to cut both in the manufacturing as well as in the salaried employees. And then the
One last
tax
question.
gaps
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Finish your sentence, sir.
and then the tax gaps that the authorities have shown not only in the sales tax, but we have spoken with the judicial system as well. There are cases of nearly, I think, 3,000 billion stuck there, so monies can come from there as well. So
All right.
let's hope that. And
Of course.
last one thing, enforcement is the real way. Authorities are now discussing a lot about enforcement as well. So you have to give me 1 minute, and all this is all right to do in this year and the next year. But I think in the longer run, Pakistan has to start thinking about simplifying the tax regime, having uniform tax regime across all the sectors, and decreasing the tax rate across the sectors, be it corporate, be it the salaried class. And then I also say that there are a lot of withholding taxes. To make the system simpler, we reduce these number of withholding taxes, and we can actually completely roll back the withholding tax regime in the country. But on the
Okay,
tax
point well taken, sir. Point well taken. So, in fact, the indirect taxation. I mean, it's of course the economist like you always supports the every move that would lead to the reduction of indirect taxes on the general masses and the businessman community as well. But the question, one final question, is why it is so much difficult to bring other sectors into TaxNet. For example, the agriculture sector, the government has recently made some decision, of course, and very much appreciated across the board. And real estate sector, why it's so much difficult to bring into the TaxNet those sectors which are really not paying their due taxes?
First, I think we have to create a tax morale in the country. You have to believe that, Shahzad, you and I use the same street light because we both have been in kind of an income taxpayer where our monies come after the tax has been taken. But there are people who have to, file the self-assessment and do their taxation themselves. They use the same street light, the same defense of the country, the same roads of the country, sometimes the same hospitals that we both use. So the tax morale has to be created, and you have to inculcate in these people that this is a duty, this is a responsibility. That's number one. Second, our enforcement has been so weak in the country that the carrot and stick, the stick factor especially, the carrot has been there where we've kept for example, retail and wholesale has been in the informal sector, and because there is less digitalization there, and this is all operating in cash money, 9,400 billion rupees of cash is circulating in the country. That's changing hands in these sectors: agriculture, retail, and third, your real estate. So we cannot document them. That's the third reason we are unable to tax them. So we have to bring them more in the digitalization and more onto, as we say, point of sales, where wherever a transaction takes place between you and a retailer, the FBR knows about it. So if we do enforcement, if we do digitalization, if we do through point of sales, we improve the tax morale, we come in heavy handed with the kinds of
Enforcement and convincing should go hand in hand, in parallel. Thank you very much, Dr. Khaqan Hassan Najeeb, for your valuable time and your inputs. Mara Mujahid, the question is, the other sectors like real estate sector, if they are not paying their taxes, but whenever we ask this question that why you guys not paying their taxes, they start totally another story, that we are heavily burdened and that's why our sector is not progressing. And real estate sector is, they tell us, is the backbone of every country's economy. So should we listen to the government or the people who are representing the real estate sector?
Obviously, thank you so much for having me on the show. Obviously, IMF, it's a International Monitoring Fund. Our funds have been monitored and very strictly monitored. Our state bank is controlled. Besides, I would say that tax reforms are really must. Our government should take some actions about that, because just an ordinary man is paying heavy taxes, but the real sectors, the government based sectors, the textile sector, they are most of them are not paying those taxes, and the burden is only on the ordinary man.
But why real estate sector is not paying the due taxes? I mean, what have you observed? I mean, what
The
is
taxes
what
over real estate sector has been so heavy, and
right?
that's why real estate sector has
Be-
been
I
deteriorated.
mean that's why they are evading the taxes, because the tax ratio is very high on them?
Obviously, the real estate just deteriorated and it went so down. From last couple of years, I have been observing, because I am into real estate sector, and now this is the time for real estate sector to be boomed, and inflation has been lowered down. Things are getting better. Government policies are really getting better day by day,
Okay.
and they are coming friendly also. So
All
I
right.
would say that
So
see,
the government is basically encouraging the people or the sector, real
definitely
estate
strategic
sector,
reforms should be
retail
made.
sector, so that they should contribute into the revenue collection and
Real
fulfill-
estate sector is, I would say that it is the backbone for any country's economy. I would say Pakistan's economy based on real estate sector.
Okay.
It
okay.
was a backbone.
All right. Dr. Usman Chauhan has joined us. He's a known economist. Thank you so much, Usman Chauhan sir, for joining us on the video link. The question was asking with Amara Mujahid that why real estate sectors and other, for instance, the retail sector or the agriculture sector, why they are not paying their due taxes, despite the fact that they are making money from this very country, but they are not fulfilling their national obligation. Why is that? I mean, should there only be reinforcement that would convince them to pay their due taxes, or is it convincing that could do the work?
It's a tricky question because the real estate sector is one that has very, very deep political ties, very, very deep, and they are immense means of wealth creation. So to try to nudge them to pay their due share is actually to turn the political system of the country, formal and informal, on its head. But I think it's very necessary. And the largest, I would say, unpaid tax, aside from retail and agriculture, which we know are big ones, is the real estate at the provincial level. This is actually a provincial subject, and the property tax collection is the big missing link in terms of us balancing out our federal and provincial budget, particularly. So then the transfer from federation to provinces would not need to be high. And the difference between Pakistan and other neighboring countries that have had similar histories and similar legal systems is that they collect considerable property tax. And so that's why it's so politically charged, but it's just that important as well.
But that is because you just mentioned and gave an example of another country, but that's because that they have a good and strong local government system where there would be almost negligible tax evasion if it is there. But here, when you are, I mean, everything is centralized. But however, despite the fact the provinces have done a really good job in the last financial year as far as the tax collection targets are concerned, but still, it's a delegation of power that is important before we start asking this question.
That's correct. I agree with you. That local government is the key because you're such a big country now. 25 crore people managed from one center, which is far away from everything. It doesn't make sense. I think that local government is the way to go. The intermediary phase of having big, bulky provinces trying to deal with their peripheries does not make sense. Local government is the way to go. And that's precisely what I'm saying in terms of because it's constitutionally like in the provincial area, well, then you should delegate it one step down without violating your constitution and have stronger property tax collection further down. And then you have a better fiscal provincial balance because of it. I agree with you.
All right, all right. Dr. VAQAR has also joined us representing Sustainable Development Policy Institute. Thank you very much, Dr. for joining us. And the question I'm asking at the moment is, how can it be an ideal mix of punitive measures and soft convincing so that the people and the sectors which are not really contributing to the tax revenue collection target, and they should start, fulfilling their national duty. Dr. Saab.
Thank you very much for having me. I think the starting point for any tax culture to be promoted is basically starts from the government's own trust building with those who have to pay. This is the same when people have to pay for utilities, for example. It is that trust, that certainty of rules that has to be put in place so that people actually find it easier to navigate their way and pay their dues. I think what we have seen in the past is that while there have been some trust-building efforts, they've been very sporadic, and you don't have a sustained leadership within the government department to sort of lead that change process. Of course, tax culture is something which is not built in 1 year. You have to develop it over the course of decades.
Yeah, but still, when there is no consensus at the political level for the economic policies, for instance, if one leader or political party encouraging the general masses not to pay their due taxes, or go for the civil disobedience, I mean, it's another debate altogether. But the question is, how should we deal with the tax evaders? I just mentioned in the beginning that the government can, of course, take the punitive measures, but they may be counterproductive, or the government may not have such a huge manpower or the infrastructure to deal with every person with a stick.
Agreed, fully agreed. And the government has taken every punitive measure which is there in the book, not just this government, but past governments as well, starting from, if you look at 1999, when you had armed personnel who used to go with FBR to collect taxes. So when it comes to trying and testing of punitive measures, we have actually tried everything in the book. Now I think there's a need not to reinvent the wheel. There's a need for public-private dialogue, and the business community, those whom we are calling that they may be tax evaders, tax avoiders, they are willing to sit down on the table. They also want to become part of the corporate formal sector. Many want to come out of the gray or the informal sector, but they need to be heard.
They need to be heard, of course, but Ms. Amara, the government always is always open for discussion and recommendations from other side of the aisle. The question is, the private sector, if they have any objection, complaints against the government policies, I mean, obviously they can come up with the good recommendations and the policies which they should be implemented in the country, but all the time which we hear is the complaints. Hardly the workable and practical solutions are presented. Why is that case?
Because as I already said, that ordinary man is not entertained in all sectors. Besides, I would say that self-reliance is very important. When self-reliance is there, the sustenance becomes forward. We can take an example of China. Now, just look at the IMF countries like Argentina, Indonesia, and Brazil and Pakistan. Now, the biggest question is Pakistan's population. It's just as we have heard that IMF cannot ignore it.
Okay.
The population growth. Besides, I would say that I said that State Bank is controlled. It's my question from you that IMF has always followed very strictly in Pakistan. Do you think that the ordinary man will stand those sanctions and all those
and the
burdens, terms and conditions?
Yeah, but don't you think that the IMF, whatever the conditions IMF is putting forward to the government, that they should be implemented, all
they
these
give the
conditions,
financial parameters which has always been
these
followed.
conditions, I mean, IMF or no IMF, but all these reforms and the steps, they must have been taken place at the first place, even without IMF. I mean, don't you think that these are important? The reforms are very much important, even if you are in the IMF program or not.
These defined parameters, look, we have 7 trillion worth national resources in only Balochistan, estimated. Why are we taking loans?
Of course, that who is stopping you to untap those resources? No one.
These are only, this should be turned into
assets.
Assets.
Okay.
And it should be an
and
industry.
And a continuous revenue stream,
it should be an industry.
Sure.
Government should take steps.
And we believe and we have heard that the government is taking
very refined and polished things. The national resources should be
recently
exported.
there are several agreements.
They can put a great implement on Pakistan economy.
That would definitely. Usman Chauhan Saab, the question is now that of course we know the challenges and all these hindrances which are we facing in tax revenue collection targets, but the question is that now we are facing almost a shortfall of 400 billion rupees. How are we going to recover from this shortfall? And I mean, at the end of this financial year, the shortfall may increase, or with some twist of luck or our good efforts, we can reduce this shortfall and turn into something that we can surpass the target. But the question is that what steps are needed at the moment to get rid of this shortfall?
Yes, this is actually a tough question that the government will have to discuss with the IMF soon enough, because the review is coming up. And there aren't easy issues or easy answers for this. But one thing is clear, that if your revenue isn't going up too quickly, then you'll have to take a look at expenditures, which was where the conversation should have been anyways, to start with. Expenditure is something that you're trying to balance out with revenues, but you don't need that many revenues if you don't have that much expenditure, and that austerity program will involve that. But if you do want to take revenue to the next step, then it's our previous.
Which is very rightly underway. The government is getting rid of dead world, they are right sizing, they are cutting their expenses. So at least we are on the right track. Maybe the pace could not meet your expectations, but at least the direction is fine.
Agreed. I agree with you that they're in the right direction, and there's a increasing political consensus that the way things that have been done for the last 50 years cannot continue any further. So I think that everybody's on board, because you can't keep kicking the can down the road. Now you have to take these decisions. So I agree with you that they're in the right direction. It's true.
Yeah, but how are we going to bridge this shortfall? The question was that.
You might not. Who says you are?
I mean, of course, that's an easy answer, but I want a true answer and an honest opinion, sort of a recommendation that if we are really going to bridge this gap, how can we do it?
Either you deal with the sacred cows, the retail, the real estate, the agriculture, and they are, but they're not doing it fast enough, as we agreed. And the other thing is then take a look at expenditures to make up for it.
We are in at the moment, you think that there is any room or space for the sacred cows?
Absolutely, because how much are you going to squeeze the salaried class like you or me any further? There's not much more for us to be squeezed. There's not enough blood in our veins now. That's why you have to go for the sacred cows.
Okay, fine. Dr. VAQAR, you still with us? Dr. VAQAR, can you hear me?
Yes.
Dr. VAQAR, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Any take on what Usman CHAUHAN was saying at the moment?
So I think we need to, of course, cut a very decent figure in the review. So what we have been resorting to in the past is that any shortfall in the taxation side is usually met by an increased effort to collect revenues on the non-tax side, which is, of course, through petroleum levy and other non-tax measures. So when it comes to, of course, passing the review, I'm sure that we will leave no stone unturned. But your central question, of course, remains that this patchwork, of course, cannot continue. We have been doing this patchwork for quite some while. You talked about the sacred cows. Of course, who makes sacred cows, they are made by policy. It is your tax policy which allows for certain sectors, segments of the productive activities to remain out of the tax net. It allows exemptions or preferences to them, and that's how they become sacred cows, So if, for example, tomorrow there's some charter of economy and there's an across-the-board sort of decision that no matter where you earn your income or wealth from, everything will be taxed and the rules would be the same, there won't be any sacred cows then.
Tell me one thing, sir, with given your experience, that whatever steps we have and we still are taking under IMF program, were they important and necessary, whether you were in the program or not?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we should have taken them ages ago. It's just that we do start on the right path. We do, of course, buy into the program. And as soon as we are off the ventilator, there's that complacency that moves us from stability to sort of that desire to grow faster. And it is.
Would I be right? Yeah. Would I be correct in saying that whatever steps we are taking, corrective measures we are taking for our own good, and in the end, as a result of it, we are getting a reward from someone. For instance, that IMF is okaying next tranche of $1 billion next month when the review comes to Pakistan. So we are doing the reforms and we are getting help from the IMF, or sort of, figure of speech, the letter of comfort. So you think that this is an ideal deal for us, that we are doing the reforms and we are getting the nod from the IMF as well?
Yes, you're right. So that's how the program is designed, that you will continue to deliver on structural reforms, which includes taxation, energy, various governance-related reforms. And as you continue to do those things, you will be provided with the future tranches as well as assistance from donors other than the IMF as well.
Ms. Amara raised a very important question, that whenever you are under an IMF program, so ultimately, or the burden, actually the burden, the poor segment of the society or the common people, they ultimately face the burden in the beginning or in the initial years of IMF program. So you think that this cycle can continue, as Finance Minister is telling us a good news that very soon they are going to give relief to the people, especially the salaried class person. So the burden, how to deal with the burden which is being felt by the common people in Pakistan under this deal?
Sorry,
Dr. VAQAR.
Okay,
yeah, I'm asking you, sir.
Yeah. So I think what the Finance Minister has revealed is that after a span of 18 months, we now have that breather in our budget where IMF may agree to increase or allow a further increase in our social protection expenditures, which could, of course, include direct cash transfers as well as reduction in utilities expenditures on electricity and gas for the lifeline consumers. So IMF has been very conservative on this, but now that there is some room in the budget, so good news may be in the offing.
All right. Dr. Amara Mujahid Sahiba, can you tell us, or would you like to tell us or recommend, given your experience in the private sector, that how can government give maximum relief to the common people? It's a fact that we are under an IMF deal program, and the economic conditions are maybe very good in the future, but at the moment that we are in a very tight spot. So how can government offer maximum relief to the people?
As I already told, that strategic reforms should be taken. Besides, Dr. VAQAR just talked about the energy sector. IMF should look after that also, because our energy generation system is outdated. We were strategically confused about this. We were purchasing fuel for energy, then we went to the hydropower, then we shifted to that. We have been facing power crisis. So this should be taken care of, I guess.
And it's a black hole, this circular debt that every year we are adding up to it, and it's really eating up our economy. Don't you agree?
Exactly, same thing. And I would like to talk about CPEC also. It has entered into its second phase. So it should be taken care also, because strategically we are in a very important location, in a very important location. From
very right.
CPEC should be also taken care by the government, because it will bring business to us. Our infrastructure, our economy, our entire peace depends on all this.
Very
so
right.
China
very
is making a very big investment here in Pakistan.
Exactly.
So it should
exactly.
be looked after.
And the economic security is very much important, that we would be looking for in the years to come, of course. Usman Chauhan, now the question is that should the government in this era be relying on the revenue streams other than the tax or the revenue targets? For instance, should the government be doing business? Let's say we are very much hopeful that we would be successful in Balochistan extracting minerals in cooperation with the friendly countries like Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, or other big companies are coming in as well. So you think that we should not be debating that the government should only rely on the tax collection, or the government should also be working on other areas and avenues to improve the revenue, the revenues, or the revenue streams, for instance? Yeah.
Yes, I do agree. Because it is important to diversify the sources of revenue of the government. If it focuses solely on taxation, then taxation will become a severe burden. It has political consequences, it has distributional consequences, it has productivity consequences, and all taxes are by their nature distortionary economically. So tax are not an ideal form, but they're a necessary form. The countries that have huge natural resources often leverage that advantage, such as the Gulf countries themselves through their oil. So it is helpful to rely on other things, but it's not just natural resources. You can also have licensing regimes. Issuing the spectrum of telephony. All of these things are assets that are in the public good and can
Is
be
there an
auctioned to
ongoing
raise.
debate among the economists that some say that it's not duty or part of the government to do the business or to get involved in the business activities? The government should only rely on the tax collection or whatever the revenue it generates from the tax collection, and it should be enough to run the affairs of the state. So if the government is into a business or any other business, so it would create certain complications. For instance,
Yes,
the monopoly and the regulatory issues. So what do you think, that it should be an ideal mix, or I don't know? Go ahead.
no, the government should not be in the business of business. That is clear. But taxation is not being in the business of business. That is simply diversifying. We're talking about diversifying your sources of revenue. But if the government is a player itself in the economy as equivalent to a business or rival to businesses, then it will simply crowd them out. This is a universal thing. So the government should not be doing operational things in the business sense, but it should have be responsible for creating a conducive environment, should be taxing for distributional reasons, and should have a minimal footprint that minimizes the distortions. So being a business person is different as opposed to generating some revenue to have some expenditure. Different mandates. One is operational, one is taxational.
No, but we have seen in the past, and because of our past policies, that we have, loss-making entities, the state-owned enterprises, and the government is trying to get rid of and trying to privatize those loss-making entities and cutting the size of the government. But of course, that's because there could be so many reasons of the state of the affair at the moment. But you think that there is a parallel argument that those entities can be turned into profit-making entities? You think that the government should really try and run those entities while there is so much debate and the discussion and the criticism that they should be privatized sooner than later?
The government's stance is to take a sweeping brush across all state-owned enterprises and try to get rid of practically everything. Perhaps that is too sweeping a move because there are some profit-making state-owned enterprises. OGDC is one. So there are some cases where you can generate a profit, but then the argument is that profit could have been generated by someone else. The counter argument to that is that there are natural monopolies, things like railways, things like oil or energy sector. There are some places
Well
where
taken. Point well taken. Point well taken. Let me get one final comment from Dr. VAQAR. Dr. VAQAR, this debate of government doing business or solely rely on the tax collection. What do you think? What's your take on this?
Yes. So if history is of any guide, I think we haven't done, as public sector, as government, we haven't done a good job of managing assets and being in productive activities. So the principle should be that government should not be in any form of business. It should, of course, remain as a policymaker, as a regulator in the market, but should not be involved in creating, generating, producing any sort of economic activity. This is a very well-recognized principle now. The inefficiencies of the government, of course, and by very nature, the way it is supposed to work doesn't allow it to, of course, operate in a competitive environment. Having said this, there will be instances where market fails. In our country as well, there are regions which may not be lucrative for the private sector. It is over there that government could go and, of course, produce economic activity or be part of or lead the economic activity to the extent that it creates a market and allows entry for private sector, for small and medium enterprises to take over.
Very right, very right. Thank you so much, Dr. VAQAR, for being part of the show. Thank you very much, Mr. Usman CHAUHAN, for your valuable time. Thank you very much, Ms. Samara MUJAHID, for your participation, and thank you very much, viewers, for watching the program. Khuda Hafiz and good night.